Chapter 1: The Impossible Crime. It is a curious thing how the most bizarre events rarely announce themselves with thunderclaps and trumpet fanfare. In the case I am about to recount, one that tested Sherlock Holmes' faculties to the very edge, it all began with a simple, rain-slicked letter slid beneath the door of 221B Baker Street just as I was preparing to join Holmes for our customary breakfast. The morning was unusually bleak for late April. A stubborn mist curled against the panes, muffling the clatter of the street below. Holmes, with his usual disregard for mealtimes, was sprawled upon the settee in his violet dressing gown, a monograph on medieval cipher wheels open on his chest and his long fingers steepled in contemplation. I had just sat down with the Times and a cup of rather disappointing tea when Mrs. Hudson's muffled footsteps were followed by the soft creak of our front door. A minute later the envelope appeared, pale gray parchment, heavy, and unmarked except for a single name written in dark green ink across the seal. Sherlock Holmes. Not Mr. Holmes. Not consulting detective. Just the name, stark and solitary. Holmes noticed my gaze, rose without a word, and took the envelope. Interesting, he murmured, lifting the seal without tearing it. Very few correspondents omit a title. Fewer still possess this deliberate handwriting. See how the tail of the H loops beneath the entire name? That is the signature of a man, or woman, who demands control. The letter within was brief, but its contents had the effect of wiping all traces of lethargy from my companion's features. Mr. Holmes, a window on the third floor of Marbury Hall opened this morning at exactly 6 a.m. There was no one in the room. No wind, no servant. The latch was bolted from within. And yet, it opened as if called. You are invited to observe it yourself. Kindly come before noon. The household awaits. A. Wexley. Holmes read it twice, his eyes sharpening with each pass. A window that opens by name, Watson, he said finally with something like quiet delight. And no human hand involved. Curious. Deeply curious. I dare say it's a mechanical defect, I offered. Or a servant's prank. Then they would not request me, my dear fellow, Holmes replied. No, there is something darker. Note the time, the insistence on observation, and the lack of explanation. They want me to see it myself. He tossed the letter onto the breakfast tray and sprang up, calling for his coat with unusual briskness. Marbury Hall, he muttered, scanning the envelope once more. Surrey, if I'm not mistaken. An hour by train, provided the line isn't waterlogged. I followed, my curiosity piqued. But what crime has been committed? A window opening hardly constitutes a police matter. Holmes grinned as he reached for his walking stick. Precisely. Which is why I am certain one has. By 11 o'clock, we were standing before Marbury Hall, a grim, ivy-strangled estate nestled atop a hill shrouded in morning fog. The structure was of Gothic build, with sharp gables, narrow windows, and a silence that clung like cobwebs. A dour butler awaited us at the door, his expression unreadable. Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson. Mr. Wexley is expecting you. We were led through a hall lined with ancestral portraits, their eyes seeming to follow our every step, until we reached a carpeted staircase. Halfway up, the butler paused. I must warn you, he said in a hushed tone, the room you are about to see was locked last night. Bolted from the inside. No one entered. The latch was still drawn this morning. Yet. He trailed off, gesturing upward. The window was open. And Miss Evelina was found in the garden below. Holmes stopped cold. Found? The butler nodded solemnly. Dead. Neck broken. She had fallen 3 stories. But the doctor believes she was already dead before the fall. Inside the third-floor chamber, we were greeted with a scene of eerie stillness. The window in question, a tall, narrow affair with ornate wooden latches, stood open though no wind stirred the heavy curtains. The sill bore no signs of pressure. No footprints marked the floor. And indeed, the door had to be unbolted from the inside to let us enter. Holmes paced the room in silence, his eyes flicking from the books on the writing desk to the faint outline of something recently removed from the mantelpiece. There is a story here, he murmured. A riddle whose answer must be whispered by air and silence. He moved to the window, examined the latch, and then peered down to the overgrown garden where a shape, now covered by white cloth, lay still among the roses. Watson, still reeling from the sudden turn, found his voice. But how could the window have opened without aid? And if she was already dead? Holmes' eyes gleamed. Watson, we have not been summoned to solve a death alone. We have been summoned to solve a voice that speaks through mechanisms and shadows. There is a killer here, my friend. One who calls windows by name. Chapter 2: Holmes and Watson's first discussion. As the carriage rattled away from Marbury Hall and toward the small village in where Holmes had arranged lodgings, I could not help but glance back at the looming silhouette of the manor, its windows dark against the receding fog. Holmes sat across from me, his arms folded, eyes shut, but I knew better than to believe he was resting. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I asked, breaking the silence that had settled between us like a woolen blanket. He opened his eyes slowly and leaned forward, fingertips touching as he often did when deep in thought. "Three elements, Watson," he said softly, "each stranger than the last. 1. A window that opens at a precise time, observed by multiple witnesses, though no hand touched it. 2. A locked room from which no exit was possible without notice. And 3. A young woman found broken in the garden, yet likely dead before she fell." I shivered, more from the tone of his voice than the chill in the air. But what possible link could exist between them? What motive? What mechanism? "That," Holmes replied, "is precisely the question. But it is far too early for conclusions. What we possess now are facts, scattered and half-buried." He leaned back again, one eye narrowing. "Tell me, Watson, did you notice the perfume on the mantel?" "I did," I said, pleased to have observed something for once. "A faint floral scent. Lilac, perhaps." "Jasmine," Holmes corrected gently. "And too fresh for a room that had supposedly been sealed all night. Someone entered that room after Miss Evelina's fall, someone who left no trace, yet lingered long enough to disturb the air." I frowned. "But the door was bolted." "Yes," he said. "Which suggests they entered before the window opened, or never left at all." The carriage pulled to a halt. We alighted in front of the modest red cask inn, its sign swinging gently in the breeze. The innkeeper, a red-faced man with curious eyes, greeted us with a deferential nod and led us to a small parlor off the main room. Tea was waiting, and as Holmes declined refreshment, I took the liberty of pouring myself a cup. "Holmes," I said after a moment, "you haven't spoken of the victim. Miss Evelina. What do we know of her?" He steepled his fingers again. "Very little. But we shall know more by tomorrow. I've sent word to Stamford to wire her physician and governess, both of whom were not present at the hall. Miss Evelina Wexley was, by the family's account, quiet, unmarried, fond of reading and botany. But such descriptions are rarely useful. No woman dies under such peculiar circumstances without someone having a motive." "You believe she was murdered, then?" Holmes smiled without humor. "I believe we are being led to believe she fell. And I believe that window, so theatrically timed, is the central pivot of the crime." He stood, pacing the small room. "There is something else, Watson. Something that stirs unease in me more than the broken latch or the empty room." I waited, sensing he was on the edge of a revelation. "The letter," he said at last. "You recall how it was addressed?" "Yes. Simply, Sherlock Holmes." "Exactly. But consider, Watson, how did the writer know to summon me before the crime was known publicly?" I set my cup down slowly. "You think the letter was written before Miss Evelina's death?" "Ido. The phrasing is precise. A window on the 3rd floor, open this morning at exactly 6 a.m. Not will open nor has been discovered. The writer knew when it would occur and that it would demand my attention. That, my dear fellow, changes the very nature of this case. It is not simply a puzzle of physical circumstances, it is a performance, prepared in advance." We sat in silence for a time, the weight of his words settling between us. At length I said, "Then the killer wanted you involved?" Holmes nodded. "Or feared I might become involved later, and wished to control the terms." A knock at the door interrupted our grim thoughts. The innkeeper stepped in, hat in hand. "Beg pardon, sirs. A boy brought this note. Said it was urgent. No name on it, just, well, here." Holmes took the folded slip, eyes narrowing as he read the brief scrawl. "Look to the west window." Not all who watched were seen. There was no signature. No date. Just that cryptic message in a shaky, hurried hand. "Another message," I said. "But this one clearly from someone afraid. Or someone playing yet another game," Holmes murmured. "Either way, the plot deepens." He moved to the window and looked out at the mist-blurred road that led back toward Marbury Hall. "We return tomorrow, Watson. At first light. I want to see that window as it was, not as it was found." "And what of the note?" I asked. Holmes tucked it into his pocket. "It tells me one thing with certainty. Someone was watching that room from outside. And they saw something they should not have." Chapter 3. The first clues: a scene of deception. It was just after 7 when Holmes and I arrived once more at Marbury Hall, the morning fog not yet lifted from the hollows of the surrounding estate. The manor appeared unchanged, stern, silent, withholding, but now, with the knowledge of the cryptic note from the night before, the very windows seemed to peer back at us with a secret of their own. Inspector Lestrade had arrived ahead of us, summoned by the local constabulary after the discovery of Evelina Wexley's body. He stood near the entrance, boots muddied from the garden, chewing irritably on the stem of a dead pipe. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Holmes," he said with thinly veiled exasperation. "I suppose you've come to unpick what we've already stitched as usual." "Good morning, Lestrade," Holmes said evenly. "I trust your men have preserved the scene?" "Preserved?" Lestrade scoffed. "There's precious little to preserve. The room was locked from within, no signs of entry or struggle. Young lady's body shows no defensive wounds. Doctor says she likely fell asleep, walked in her sleep and toppled. Tragic but not criminal." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "And yet the window opened at exactly 6 o'clock, on its own." Lestrade waved a hand. "Clock may be wrong. Or it was open all night and only noticed at 6. People embellish details and shock. I'm not wasting Crown resources chasing phantom breezes and ghosts." With that, he turned and stomped away toward his waiting carriage. Holmes and I ascended to the 3rd floor alone. The hallway was narrow, lined with time-darkened portraits. A maid passed us silently, her eyes downcast, clutching a silver tray with trembling hands. Holmes watched her go, then opened the door to the room once again. Next was Mrs. Langley, the housekeeper, a stern woman of 60 with a face carved from stone and eyes that missed nothing. She folded her arms upon sitting, as if bracing against interrogation. "I don't hold with ghost stories," she began flatly. "If Miss Evelina threw herself, it's because she was not well. If someone helped her, then I'd ask why they'd bother with theatrics." "Indeed," Holmes said. "You've been here long?" 32 years. I served the Wexleys before the children were born. I know every creak in this house." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then tell me, Mrs. Langley, who walked the West Hall at 5:55 yesterday morning?" Her lips thinned. "No one." "Someone did," Holmes said coolly. A scent of jasmine was released in a sealed room. Footsteps were heard by the gardener, though he thought it was wind. Someone passed outside Miss Evelina's door minutes before the window opened. Mrs. Langley looked him in the eye. "If you say so. But I saw nothing. I hear nothing in this house that the house doesn't want me to hear. That, I confess, unsettled even me." As she exited, Holmes rose and paced. "Each has lied, Watson," he said under his breath. "Wexley about his sister's correspondence. Ivy about her presence near the hall. And Mrs. Langley, she knows something she's not prepared to share." "And the mysterious Elric?" I asked. "A shadow," Holmes replied. "But one with substance. We must trace him. I'll send a telegram to the British Museum's guest registry. If he is a scholar, he may have left a footprint." A final figure entered the drawing room just as Holmes prepared to leave. He was not part of the household. Reverend Alcott, a gaunt, sharp-featured man with deep-set eyes and a clerical collar worn thin with age. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quietly. "I came to comfort the household. But I heard you were here, Mr. Holmes, and I fear I must tell you what Miss Evelina confessed to me in her last visit." Holmes gestured for him to continue. "She told me she heard a voice. Every night, just before dawn. A voice that whispered her name, not aloud but in her head. It told her the window would open when it was time. That he would call her when it was ready." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Delusions," I whispered. Reverend Alcott shook his head. "Perhaps. But she believed it. And belief, Mr. Holmes, can be just as dangerous as truth." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed slightly. "Thank you, Reverend. You've given us something no one else has, fear made intimate. We shall see where it leads." Chapter 5. First suspects the red herring. It was a curious paradox, as I reflected in my notes that evening, how a house so filled with silence could seem to shriek with secrets. Holmes, seated across from me in our rooms at the Red Cask Inn, was absorbed in telegram correspondence, his thin fingers tapping rhythmically against the table. The scent of lamp oil and damp parchment hung in the air, and the fire gave off just enough warmth to remind us that Marbury Hall was not yet behind us. "Watson," Holmes said abruptly without looking up, "have you considered how very convenient Edward Wexley's grief appears?" I looked up from my journal. "Convenient?" "He lost his sister. His distress seemed genuine to me." "Ah," Holmes replied, "but grief, my dear fellow, is not the same as guilt, and Mr. Wexley appears to be trying rather too hard to convince us of the former while steering us away from the latter. His insistence on Evelina's frailty, his dismissal of the man Elric, and his general eagerness to accept the accident theory, it all suggests a man shaping a narrative. You suspect him? Holmes didn't answer directly. Instead, he tossed a folded sheet of paper across the table. I opened it. British Museum Visitors Ledger, Elric M. Royston, Antiquities Room, February 9, March 12, March 27. Access Genealogy and Wexley Estate Records. Lodged at Pembroke House, Bloomsbury. Elric is real, Holmes said. He visited the British Museum thrice in the last 2 months, focusing on the Wexley lineage. Why would a supposed antiquarian be interested in Evelina's ancestry unless he had some stake in it? I frowned. Inheritance. Possibly, Holmes replied. But that would suggest a deeper link than anyone has admitted. What troubles me is that no one, not Edward, not the staff, mentioned any letters from Elric after he left. And yet Evelina kept speaking his name. Why? The next morning, under pale skies and a chill wind, we returned once again to Marbury Hall. Holmes requested to speak to Edward privately, and to my surprise, the man complied without resistance, leading us into the library where the scent of old tobacco and cedar hung thick in the air. I won't deny Elric Royston visited, Edward began before Holmes could speak. He came with a story, some distant cousinship through our maternal line long separated. He wanted to trace the family estate's history. I found him harmless at first. But your sister did not, Holmes said quietly. Edward hesitated. No. She had a strange fascination with him. She claimed he reminded her of something from childhood. Nonsense, of course. But he fed her ideas, talk of ancestral curses, hidden heirlooms, lost titles. She was vulnerable. I asked him to leave. Holmes's eyes sharpened. And afterward? Did she write to him? Did he return? No letters, Edward said quickly. And I never saw him again. But she spoke his name in her sleep. Ivy told me. Holmes stood and walked to the fireplace. Mr. Wexley, is there any truth to this family curse Royston spoke of? Edward chuckled nervously. Just an old legend. Some tale about our great-great-grandfather's brother being buried alive in the garden. A lunatic. Left a diary they say cursed the line. Silly Gothic stuff. Evelina believed it, I think. She believed a lot by the end. Holmes turned, folding his arms. You say you never saw Elric Royston again. Yet I believe you received a letter from him. Edward's face paled. That's absurd. I found a torn envelope in the fireplace of your study, Holmes said calmly. Partially burned, but the handwriting matched Evelina's blotter script. Royston had written. You destroyed it. For a moment, Edward didn't speak. Then he sat, slowly, hands clasped. He said he was coming back. That Evelina had something that belonged to his family. I feared it would start her delusions again. I burned it. I didn't think. He turned. The smell in the garden, it wasn't cigars. It was lavender. I burned his letters there. I didn't want anyone else to read what he wrote about me. Blaise gave a slow nod, then left her in the firelight, the room cloaked in silence, save for the soft crackle of flame and the weight of a secret finally exhaled. Chapter 7. The Black Glove by the River. The wind howled over the muddy banks of the Thames as Inspector Arlo Trent and Constable Merrick stepped out of their carriage, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The river, swollen from days of rain, slapped lazily against the pilings of a crumbling dock. Lanterns swung gently from iron hooks, their dim light barely piercing the early morning fog that rolled in from the water like a living thing. This is where the boy said he found it? Trent asked, eyeing the sodden path that curved along the riverbank. Yes, sir, Merrick replied, pulling his coat tighter around himself. Right beneath that archway there. Said it was sticking out of the reeds. They approached slowly. The stone arch, once part of a forgotten shipping route, now served as a shelter for beggars and outcasts. It stank of rotting fish and mildew. Beneath it, nestled in the dark mud, was the object in question, a single black leather glove. Trent knelt, careful not to disturb the imprint it left. Men's size, he murmured. But small. Narrow fingers. Worn smooth at the knuckles. Could it be hers, sir? Merrick asked, glancing around nervously. Trent looked up sharply. Lady Severin wouldn't wear this sort of glove. Too coarse. Too lived in. He reached for his handkerchief and gently lifted it, inspecting the stitching. Inside the cuff, barely visible, was a faded mark, RH. Trent stood, folding the glove into a linen pouch. Get this to forensics. And find out if we have anyone in our files with those initials, RH, who might be connected to Lady Severin or the Ferrymore Theatre. Merrick nodded, scribbling furiously into his notepad. And the boy, sir? Keep him close. Quietly. If word gets out that we're sniffing around here, whoever dropped this glove might try to make it disappear. Or worse. They turned to leave when something in the undergrowth rustled. Trent paused, hand going instinctively to the revolver beneath his coat. A figure emerged, a girl, barefoot and no older than 15, wrapped in a blanket that looked like it had been pulled from a trash heap. Her eyes were wide and wary but not fearful. I saw him, she said, voice rough from the cold. The man what left the glove. Came down here last night. Thought he was tossing something in the river but he changed his mind. Dropped the glove and bolted when he saw me. Trent approached slowly. Did you get a look at his face? She shook her head. Too dark. But he walked with a limp. Right leg dragged a little, like he'd twisted it once and never healed right. Trent exchanged a glance with Merrick. Did you see where he went? Up toward the theater. Same way he came. That narrowed the suspects but not nearly enough. What's your name? Maisie. Well, Maisie, you've just become part of a very serious inquiry. I need you to come with us and give a full statement. She hesitated. There's hot tea in it for you. And a warm meal. Maisie considered this, then nodded once. As they made their way back toward the carriage, Trent's mind raced. A glove bearing the initials RH. A witness who described a man with a limp. And the fact that this stranger was near the river, near the one place Lady Severin's carriage had been seen passing in the hours before her death, was no coincidence. He needed to get back to Ferrymore. 2 hours later, the theater loomed once again before him, no less sinister in the gray daylight. He didn't bother with pleasantries this time. Instead, he asked for the theater's records, cast lists, crew rosters, anyone who had worked under the initials RH. After several grumbling minutes from the theater's overworked secretary, a small list was produced. Names, dates of employment, brief roles. One caught Trent's eye. Reuben Halliday, stagehand, props coordinator, injured in 1891, leg fracture. Dismissed from staff 3 months ago. Trent tapped the name. Where is he now? The secretary shrugged. He's not one of ours anymore. Had a temper. Fancied himself an actor. They say he took Lady Severin's rejection hard. A door opened in Trent's mind, a corridor of motive, opportunity and rage. If Halliday had once worked backstage, he would have known every trick of the theater. Every shadow, every silence. He could have moved unseen, inserted himself into scenes unnoticed, or worse, set the stage for murder. Trent handed the name to Merrick. Find him. Quietly. If he's half as clever as I suspect, we won't get a second chance. As Merrick dashed off, Trent stood in the darkened hallway of Ferrymore, the sound of rehearsals echoing faintly through the rafters above. Somewhere amid the actors and shadows, a murderer walked freely, one who had left just enough behind to hint at his guilt, but not enough to prove it. Yet. Chapter 8. The Whispering Walls of Viridian Row. The next morning brought with it a restless energy. The house at Viridian Row 11 stood silent but brimming with suggestion. Rain had fallen in the early hours, leaving the ivy-coated bricks glistening, as though the building itself was sweating under the weight of its secrets. Detective Aurelius Blake stood at the top of the main stairwell, eyes scanning the dark-paneled corridor below. He had spent the night reviewing the statements, the house plans, and revisiting the servants' wing alone by lantern. No new noise had emerged, no midnight shrieks, no phantom footsteps, but the silence was more disturbing than any sound. Silence, after all, was the surest sign that someone was holding their breath. Harold brought him tea at dawn. The butler's hands trembled slightly as he placed the cup down. You seem rattled, Blake noted without looking up. Harold hesitated. Sir, I heard Lady Andromeda speaking in the library last night. To whom? That's just it, sir. There was no one else. Blake turned to him now. You're certain? Harold nodded. I stood outside the door for several minutes. I heard her mention the word Gardenius repeatedly. Then silence. When I entered, she was sitting by the fire, alone, eyes closed. Did she acknowledge your presence? She didn't even look at me. Blake filed that quietly away. Gardenius. The flower was found on the windowsill near Philip's room. The flower no one else seemed to see. Later that morning he found Lady Andromeda in the solarium, gently pruning a spider plant. She wore her mourning veil again, despite no official funeral plans. Her fingers moved delicately over the stems as if she were handling bones. Did you enjoy your talk last night? Blake asked, settling into the chair across from her. Her eyes narrowed behind the black veil. Talk. In the library. With your invisible friend. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the wide glass windows. Rain fell in thin strands. You know, detective, grief is not a straight path. Sometimes it doubles back on you, like a shadow trying to re-enter your skin. Grief can explain sorrow. Even silence. But not secrets. She didn't flinch. You believe I'm hiding something. I believe everyone here is hiding something. You just happen to do it more elegantly. Her lips curled faintly. I spoke aloud last night, yes. I was rehearsing a letter I planned to write. To whom? My husband. Posthumously, of course. Blake leaned forward. Why Gardenius? Her fingers froze mid-snip. Pardon? You mentioned them several times. And one was found in the hallway. An unusual bloom for a rainy winter. Andromeda lowered her shears. Philip once brought me gardenias the day after our first argument. I'd never seen them in this region. He claimed he imported them, though I suspected the greenhouse. He knew I adored them. That was his way, quiet gestures after quiet cruelties. She paused. He planted some in the West Garden. They've never bloomed properly since. May I see them? She hesitated, then nodded once. The West Garden was a forgotten corner of the estate, moss-covered paths, withered trellises, a broken sundial. And there, half buried in a bed of creeping ivy, were the gardenia plants. Brown-edged leaves, curling in defeat. Blake crouched beside them and brushed aside the ivy. Something metallic glinted beneath the leaves. He pulled free a tarnished locket on a broken chain. Inside was a photograph. A woman not much older than Lady Andromeda. And Philip, younger, smiling with a rare tenderness. On the back of the photo, a faded inscription. Well, you are the garden I should have chosen. Blake looked up. Who is this woman? Lady Andromeda stared at the photo. Her lips parted, then closed. Lavinia, she whispered. Philip's first love. His true one, if truth must be spoken. Where is she now? Dead. Years ago. Consumption, I believe. Then why hide this? Blake asked, lifting the locket. Because he never buried her. Not in his heart. And some ghosts are more dangerous when unacknowledged. That afternoon, Blake returned to the library. He had Harold bring him the house records, purchase documents, servant registries, and renovation permits. One line caught his eye. 1867. Modifications to basement level, east wing. Tunnel sealed. He summoned Harold again. This tunnel, was it ever reopened? Harold blinked. Not to my knowledge, sir. It was sealed after the war. For safety. Though the east wing has had peculiarities. Define peculiarities. Faint sounds. Cold spots. A door that refuses to stay locked. Blake stood. Show me. The door in question was at the end of a narrow stone corridor, past the wine cellar. The air was colder here, heavy with mildew. Harold handed him the key, and Blake turned the lock with a groan of rusted iron. The door creaked open to reveal a set of narrow stairs descending into blackness. Lantern in hand, Blake stepped down, leaving Harold behind. The air grew damp. The stone walls sweat moisture. Then the stairs ended, and he found himself in a small chamber, walls lined with ancient brick. At the far end was the tunnel. It had been bricked up crudely, as if someone had been in a rush. Mortar crumbled with age. Near the base, a loose brick jutted out. Blake pulled it free. Inside was a hollow pocket, and within it, a cloth bundle wrapped in oilskin. He opened it. Inside, a woman's handkerchief stained with blood, a ring bearing the crest of House Viridian, and a folded letter addressed simply. To be found in the event of my disappearance. It was signed, Lavinia Merrick. Blake held the letter for a long time before returning upstairs. The pieces were moving now, slowly but inevitably. Anne Viridian Row, for all its grandeur, was starting to rot from within. Not just connected, she said, voice trembling. They were all part of a private group. Investors, they called themselves. A collective. But what they were really doing, she exhaled shakily. They manipulated land rights, laundering money through property deals, evicting poor families with forged contracts. My husband was the face of it in town, the respectable one, the one who gave speeches at the community hall. But behind closed doors he was cruel. Calculating. Blaze's eyes narrowed. Who else was in this group? I only know a few names. Henry Taylor, who died last year in that hunting accident. Bernard Fisher, dead 3 months ago, supposedly a heart attack. But it was always too convenient. All of them were married. And all their wives, they knew. You're saying the widows took matters into their own hands? I'm saying we were tired, Eliza said. Tired of being used, silenced, lied to. One by one the wives found each other. At garden parties, church meetings. We pieced it all together. And we decided, no more. The silence that followed was heavy. Blaze sat down slowly in the chair across from her. Did you kill your husband, Eliza? She looked up at him. No. I considered it, God help me. But I didn't. I left the tea out that morning, yes. I knew he liked it hot. But I never touched it. I swear on everything I have left. Then who did? I don't know. But I think one of the other wives moved first. Blaze stood up. The lines of the case were redrawing themselves. This wasn't a crime of passion anymore, it was something deeper. A web of secrets, revenge, and quiet justice. He needed to speak with the other widows. By dusk, Blaze was standing at the gate of Mrs. Agnes Corwin's home, an ivy-covered cottage at the edge of town. Agnes had been Bernard Fisher's wife. She was known to be gentle, reclusive, with a love of poetry and roses. Agnes answered the door herself. She was dressed in a black shawl, her silver hair pinned back, and her eyes sharp beneath the soft lines of age. Detective, she said without surprise. I was wondering when one of you would come knocking. May I come in? She stepped aside wordlessly. Inside, her home was warm, lit with golden lamplight and filled with the scent of drying herbs. Books lined the walls, and a painting of her late husband hung above the fireplace. I won't insult you with small talk, Blaze said. Eliza told me about the group. The so-called Widows' Club. Agnes didn't flinch. Then I suppose you've figured out what's been happening in East Brim. I figured out part of it. But not who's pulling the final string. 3 men dead. Possibly 4. If Eliza didn't do it, someone did. Agnes sat down, her eyes never leaving his. I loved Bernard once. Truly. But when I found out what he'd done, who he'd destroyed, I stopped mourning. I started listening. To who? To the pain. The whispers of other women like me. And then one day we stopped whispering. Did you kill him? No. But I helped cover it up. We all did. We made sure no questions were asked. But Charles Ashcombe, he wasn't supposed to die yet. That's why Eliza was shocked. That's why she's scared. Blaze leaned forward. You're saying someone in your group is acting alone? Agnes nodded. And that terrifies me more than anything. Because whoever it is, they've gone beyond justice. They're tasting blood now. Later that night, Blaze stood in his office staring at the crime board. 4 dead men. 4 widows. 1 club. But now, a rogue element, a killer among them, no longer satisfied with quiet vengeance. There were still too many questions. How had Charles Ashcombe died without a trace of poison or violence? Why had the other deaths also appeared natural? And who among the women had crossed the line? As Blaze circled a photo of each widow with red thread, a shadow stretched long across the floor behind him. The wind howled against the window, and in his chest, a growing unease settled. The game was no longer just about uncovering a motive. It was now a race to find the next target, before the killer struck again. Chapter 11. Whispers Behind the Vellum. The following morning arrived grey and hesitant, the kind of dull English daylight that seemed reluctant to settle upon London's rooftops. A thin mist clung to the cobblestones of Baker Street, curling against the windows like a cat unwilling to depart. Holmes sat hunched near the hearth, a solitary figure immersed in thought. The fire had died down, casting long shadows behind him. He had not changed clothes from the night before, and his violin lay untouched beside his chair, a sure sign his thoughts had gripped him deeply. I placed a tray with tea and toast near his elbow. You've not slept, I observed gently. A few minutes at most, he murmured. But even dreams cannot outpace the puzzle of a fabricated miracle. He gestured toward a stack of papers beside him, copies of the coroner's report, maps of Draycott's grounds, and notably, a letter Holmes had received that very morning. It was unsigned, penned in precise script, and delivered by hand at dawn. Mr. Holmes, you risk much by stirring the ashes. Let sleeping men lie. No justice is owed the dead who engineered their own curses. A friend. I stared at the letter, unease prickling the nape of my neck. A threat? I asked. A veiled suggestion. And quite revealing, Holmes said, standing up. It suggests that someone close to the heart of this riddle fears exposure, or prefers the illusion remain intact. There was a pause. And it tells me, Holmes added, that we are on the right path. Before I could reply there came a knock. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a guest, Miss Evelyn Marston. The young woman looked more composed than she had at the funeral, though her eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. "I must speak with you, Mr. Holmes. Privately, if I may." Holmes gestured for me to stay. "You may speak freely," he assured her. She hesitated. Then, with a breath, she withdrew a folded page from her handbag and placed it on the table. "I found this wedged behind a book in my uncle's study. It's his handwriting. It's peculiar." Holmes took the paper and read silently. Then his eyes narrowed. I leaned over and read with him. "If memory survives death, let mine wander where even ink fades. Evelyn shall inherit the truth in firelight. When the window glows, she must burn the vellum." Vellum. Holmes looked up sharply. "Did your uncle keep any such document?" "He had an old volume bound in it, a family heirloom," he said. "It was always kept locked in his glass cabinet. He called it the Codex of Curses, but I assumed it was just a name." Holmes was already reaching for his coat. "We must examine that codex before someone ensures we never do." "But the house was sealed after the inquest," she said. "The solicitor holds the key." "I doubt the solicitor would object to a Holmesian intervention," I muttered, already pulling on my gloves. Holmes gave me a dry smile. "Indeed, Watson." The Draycott estate lay cloaked in the same grey drizzle that had swallowed London. It stood tall and silent, its shutters closed, ivy curling like skeletal fingers across the stone. We entered with Miss Marston and the key she had quietly borrowed from the distracted solicitor. Inside, the study was thick with dust and disuse. Holmes moved swiftly to the glass cabinet. It had been locked, but not untouched. "The seal has been broken," he noted grimly. "Someone has been here." The codex lay in its velvet cradle, untouched by time, bound in yellowed vellum, its spine cracked but whole. Holmes examined it under the study lamp. Its title was etched faintly in Latin, Maleficarum Testamenta. He turned the pages delicately. The manuscript was a mixture of genealogical lore, herbal recipes, and strange personal notes penned by various Draycotts across generations. Then, wedged between two pages, a slip of thin parchment, nearly transparent. Holmes held it to the light. "It's a palimpsest," he murmured. "The writing was scraped away, but faint traces remain." He set the page on the table and produced a small bottle from his coat, iodine solution. "Holmes, surely. Trust me, Watson." He brushed the liquid across the vellum with a soft cloth. Letters bloomed slowly under the chemical, like bruises emerging on skin. A confession, fragmentary, damaged, but unmistakable. "I was the cause. Not death but illusion. Evelyn must never know. Forgive the trick. The curse was mine to wear, not theirs to fear. Let the truth die with me." Signed only with a looping initial, G. Holmes leaned back, jaw clenched. "The ghost," he said softly, "was no ghost. And the miracle, a masterful deception. Draycott orchestrated it all." Evelyn sank into the nearest chair. "But why?" she whispered. "Why pretend to rise from the grave? Why scare us with illusions?" Holmes looked at her gently. "Because, Miss Marston, your uncle believed he could atone only by haunting what he once poisoned. The truth is not yet complete. But I believe he feared someone close to him. And he staged a miracle to protect, or expose, what lay buried." I felt a chill pass through the room as though the house itself exhaled. Holmes closed the codex. "We must go back to the beginning. To the night of his first death." And with that we stepped once more into the fog. Chapter 12, The Shadow on the Rooftop. "Sign?" Blaise asked sharply. "Like sign language?" Miko nodded. "Fast." Like she was scared and trying to talk but couldn't speak. Ellie leaned in. "You sure about that?" "Yeah," Miko said. "My little cousin's deaf. I recognize the signs." She kept doing one over and over. "Like this?" He raised his hand and quickly mimicked a motion, index and middle finger tapping his lips, then pointing outward. Ellie gasped. "That's help." She was saying, "Help me." Blaise's jaw tightened. "Where did the man take her?" Miko shrugged. "Over the edge. Onto the next roof. I didn't follow. I was scared." Blaise stood. "You did good, Miko. Better than most." The kid blinked, surprised. "So I'm not in trouble?" "You're not a hero either," Blaise said. "But you might have just given that girl a chance." They left Miko with Officer Davis and returned to the bullpen. Ellie opened her laptop and started pulling up building permits for the block adjacent to the Half Moon Diner. "There's an old butcher shop next door. Closed 3 years ago. Owner died in prison, racketeering. Property's been tied up in probate. No one goes in or out." Blaise leaned over her shoulder. "Got a name?" Johnny Verona. The one-eyed butcher. Connected to the Rizzoli crime family. Blaze whistled low. Didn't know we were swimming in mob waters. Ellie clicked through more files. Wait, here's something. Johnny had a son. Enlisted, dishonorably discharged in 2019. Went off the radar. Blaze narrowed his eyes. Military coat. His name's Luca Verona, Ellie said. Last known address, a P.O. box. No active employment, no credit trail. He's a ghost. But ghosts don't bleed, Blaze said, grabbing his coat. Let's wake up the one-eyed butcher's house of horrors. The rain intensified as they pulled up in front of the boarded-up butcher shop. The street was silent except for the soft splatter of water on concrete and the occasional hiss of passing tires. Blaze climbed out, hand on his gun. Ellie followed, flashlight in hand. The windows were covered in plywood and the front door chained. But down the side alley, a service entrance showed signs of recent use. A broken lock, scuffed paint. Blaze pushed it open slowly. Inside, the air reeked of rot and mildew. Shelves lined with rusted meat hooks, cracked tile floors stained in old rust and something darker. The building groaned with every gust of wind. Ellie swept her light across the room and froze. Footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. Blaze stepped ahead, gun raised. Each step echoed like a hammer strike. As they reached the back, Ellie paused at a stairwell leading down. The basement, she whispered. Blaze nodded. Let's see if ghosts leave messages in blood. And together they descended into the dark. Chapter 14. The Mirror's Reflection. The twilight sky had dimmed to a heavy charcoal by the time Detective Blaze and Constable Mira reached the abandoned greenhouse at the edge of Hollow Pines. Vines coiled like serpents around its shattered glass frame, and the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories clung to the air. It was Mira who spotted the rusted padlock on the door, freshly broken. I don't like this, she whispered. This place hasn't seen sunlight in years. Blaze didn't answer immediately. He was listening again, always listening. To the creak of shifting beams, to the soft crackle of weeds underfoot, to the memory of Evelyn's silence in that hallway. She'd known something. Something she couldn't say out loud. They stepped inside. Shards of colored glass still clung to the ceiling, casting fractured shadows over the dried-out flower beds and the marble table at the center. Something lay on that table. A photo. Yellowed at the edges, water-stained. Blaze picked it up. It was a group picture. 6 people. 5 of them were known. Father Loring, Evelyn, Marlin, Professor Holt, and Florence Oates. The 6th person had his back turned to the camera. Blaze tilted the photo under the weak beam of his torch. A mirror stood behind the group, and in it the 6th man's face was visible. And Blaze knew him. Dr. Silas Finch, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Myra's brow furrowed. The coroner? But he's been retired for years. Not just the coroner, Blaze said. He was also Florence's cousin. He vanished 2 decades ago after a scandal. Lost his license. He was the one accused of forging autopsy reports, including the one for Florence's fiancée. And he just disappeared? Until now. Blaze pocketed the photograph. There was a reason Evelyn had kept this hidden away. A reason no one mentioned Finch's name. They stepped further into the greenhouse, and as they did, Blaze's shoe scuffed something metallic half buried in the soil. He crouched. A scalpel. But not rusted. Used. Someone's been coming here, Blaze murmured. Preparing. Watching. The walls of the greenhouse seemed to breathe around them, alive with secrets. Mira shivered, looking over her shoulder. What are we really looking at here, Blaze? This isn't about an old scandal anymore, is it? Blaze shook his head. No. This is about a ghost with a scalpel and a grudge. Someone who wants to rewrite the past. Someone who knows exactly where all the bodies are buried, because he buried some of them himself. They left the greenhouse with more questions than answers. But as they drove back into town, Blaze's mind wouldn't stop circling one detail. The mirror. That reflection. What if the mirror had never lied? Back at the precinct, Blaze sat alone in the archive room, lit only by the green desk lamp and the hum of the building. He pulled out the town's death records. Finch's name appeared over and over again, linked with signatures, strange timings, and medical contradictions no one had followed up on, until now. And then, in one of the last folders, he found a thin envelope. It was addressed to Florence Oates. Never opened. Postmarked 3 days before her disappearance. Blaze opened it carefully. Inside was a single sentence typed in black ink. You've forgotten what I know. But I remember everything. It was signed, SF. Blaze sat back, exhaling slowly. Finch had returned. He'd never really left. He'd just been waiting for the right moment to reappear, behind the scenes, beneath the surface. And now the pieces were moving. All of them. Even the ones long thought dead. Chapter 15. Echoes beneath the floorboards. The following morning broke with a hush, as if the town of Hollow Pines was holding its breath. Detective Blaze stood inside Florence Oates' childhood home, now abandoned and owned by the town. It had been sealed for years after her disappearance, more out of fear than respect. Rumors of hauntings had kept the curious away, but Blaze wasn't chasing ghosts. He was hunting a man who had become one. The key from Evelyn's brooch had unlocked the front door with a clean click. Now Blaze moved through the dust-coated silence, Constable Mira close behind, flashlight beams sweeping across faded wallpaper and veiled furniture. A heavy blanket of decay muffled their footsteps. The parlor smelled of mildew and forgotten perfume. Blaze stopped near the grand piano in the corner. Evelyn said Florence played, he murmured. But Evelyn hated music. Mira looked confused. So why mention it? She didn't. Blaze knelt by the piano, examining the floorboards. But she walked past it and tapped the top twice. Just twice. Myra's eyes widened. A signal? Blaze nodded. I think she was trying to point us to something below. He tapped on the floorboards. One panel sounded different, hollow. With Myra's help, he pried it open. Beneath the wooden slats was a compartment. Not deep enough for storage, but inside was a single item, a black velvet box. Inside lay a voice recorder. Blaze turned it on. The hiss of static, then a voice, Florence's. I know I shouldn't be recording this, but I'm scared. They told me not to speak, not to dig. But I did. I found what Silas was doing. I found the autopsy files. He falsified them, all of them. My fiancé didn't overdose, he was poisoned. And Silas covered it up because... A beat of silence then. Because he was the one who did it. The recording clicked off. Myra's mouth parted. That's why she disappeared. She confronted him. And Evelyn helped her hide the truth, Blaze said, his voice low. Maybe she even helped her escape. But Finch never forgot. And he's back now. That was the warning in the letter. They sealed the box and replaced the floorboard. Blaze stood, his mind racing. Why return now? Mira asked. Why start again after all this time? Blaze's eyes narrowed. Because he was waiting. For something, or someone. Just then Myra's phone buzzed. She read the message and paled. Blaze, it's the hospital. They found Dr. Finch. Blaze turned sharply. Alive. She nodded. Alive. At least for now. He's in critical condition. Someone broke into his safe house. The nurse on duty said he had a journal with him, filled with names. They were already out the door, racing through town as rain began to fall in thick, heavy sheets. The hospital lights glowed pale through the downpour. Inside, the corridors buzzed with tension. A nurse led them to a private room under guard. If I vanish, do not believe I ran. I was taken. Please find me. A rustle stopped them cold. From the trees. Mira turned, gun drawn. Blaze shielded Evelyn. Footsteps. But nothing emerged. Blaze scanned the fog, eyes narrowing. We're not alone. The garden had memorable. And so had someone else. Chapter 17. The footsteps in the fog. Myra's finger hovered over the trigger, her eyes darting through the veils of mist that curled between the trees. The night had gone still, too still. The only sound was the soft patter of rain on leaves and the low murmur of Evelyn's breath behind them. Then came another sound. A branch snapping. Closer. Blaze crouched over the half-dug grave, eyes scanning the dark garden perimeter. Mira, he whispered. Flank left. Keep low. Without hesitation, Mira moved, disappearing into the mist like a shadow melting into another. Evelyn clutched her shawl, whispering, He's here. He always returns to the garden. Just like then. Blaze touched her shoulder gently. Stay behind me. He stepped forward, drawing his sidearm. The soil under his boots felt soft and slick, like memory itself was trying to pull him under. Another step. Another crack of a twig. Blaze's voice cut through the fog. Who's there? Show yourself. No answer. But then came a voice, dry, low, and almost amused. Detective Blaze. You dig like an amateur. Out of the mist emerged a tall figure in a long brown coat, umbrella over his shoulder, gloved hands clasped in front. Silas Finch. Alive. And smiling. I wondered how long it would take, he said. The brooch, the piano, the journal. Clever Evelyn, always so theatrical. Mira reappeared behind Finch, gun raised. Hands where I can see them, she said firmly. Finch didn't flinch. You're far too late, Constable. What you found in the ground, it won't matter. That evidence died the moment Florence did. No court will touch a 30-year-old accusation wrapped in mold and guilt. Blaze's jaw tightened. You think this is about court? Finch raised an eyebrow. Isn't it always? Blaze held up the tapes. These are originals. Florence recorded your threats. We'll clean them, restore the sound. Her voice will speak again. Finch's smile thinned. So dramatic. You think this ends with some teary courtroom revelation? He took a slow step forward. Mira tightened her aim. Stop, Blaze said. Don't move. But Finch didn't listen. His voice dropped to a hiss. Eva survived Florence. Survived Evelyn. Survived the foundation, the hospital board, the threats. And you think 2 Midtown detectives are going to finish what others failed to even begin? He reached into his coat. Mira fired. The shot cracked like thunder across the garden. Finch staggered, hand halfway inside his coat. Then he collapsed backward, his umbrella flying into the bushes. Blaze rushed forward, kicking the coat open, expecting a weapon. But what he found was stranger. A file folder. Damp from rain but dry on the inside. Sealed with a plastic band. The label, scrawled in Florence's handwriting, said, Odes and Omissions. Mira knelt beside Finch, checking his pulse. Alive, she confirmed. But barely. Blaze took the folder carefully. He opened it just enough to glimpse page after page of notarized statements, hospital memos, falsified autopsy reports, all with Finch's name attached. Florence gave him a copy, Blaze said softly. She wanted him to sweat. This was her trap. Evelyn slowly stepped forward, eyes wide as she looked at Finch's unconscious body. He came back for it, she said. He couldn't burn the original, so he tried to bury it. Like he buried her. Blaze stood and looked to Mira. Call for transport. Medical and backup. We're locking this place down. And Mira? Yes. Get a preservation order for that garden. Everything stays untouched. This is now an official crime scene. She nodded and stepped away to radio it in. Evelyn knelt beside Finch, not to comfort him, but to watch. He always thought he was invincible, she whispered. But gardens don't forget. And neither did I. Blaze turned to her. You could have told us sooner. I know, Evelyn said. But I needed you to see it. To feel it. Not just the dirt or the bones. The weight of silence. What we live with when the truth rots. The rain began to lighten. The fog thinned. In the distance, the hum of sirens approached, growing louder, cutting through years of quiet. Blaze looked down at the tapes, the envelope, the folder, and the man who had buried every truth beneath charm and credentials. Tonight, Hollow Pines had unearthed more than a body. It had unearthed the soul of a secret that never slept. Chapter 18. The Secret That Refused to Die. The courtroom was hushed, heavy with the weight of 30 years. Rain tapped lightly against the tall windows like a distant reminder of the night Hollow Pines gave up its ghosts. Detective Blaze sat just beyond the gallery rail, hands folded, watching Evelyn take the stand. She wore black, not out of mourning but resolution. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the chamber like a blade wrapped in velvet. I never meant to carry her silence this long, Evelyn said. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing my home, my reputation, my mind. Silas Finch counted on that fear. We all let him count on it. Finch sat across from her, cuffed, pale, gaunt. No longer the composed foundation director who ruled from behind polished oak desks. Now he looked like what he truly was, a man undone by the very truths he tried to bury. Florence's tapes had been restored. Not perfectly, but enough. The courtroom had heard her voice tremble as she recorded late-night confessions, documents she feared would vanish, patients she believed had been manipulated or silenced, and the threats Finch whispered to keep her quiet. The journal, authenticated and matched with signatures. The false autopsy reports tracked to Finch's authorization stamp. And the unearthed remains, a forensic match to an anonymous woman who had disappeared from the psychiatric wing in 1993. Everything fit. Not perfectly. But devastatingly enough. When Evelyn stepped down, she passed by Blaze. She paused. I didn't think anyone would ever believe a broken woman's story. Blaze gave her a soft nod. It wasn't broken. Just buried. The trial was swift. A plea deal came. Finch confessed, not to murder but to obstruction, falsification of medical documents, and tampering with patient records. The statute of limitations spared him some charges. But the press, the community, and the state made sure he would never breathe freely again. He'd spend his remaining years in a cold, regulated room, ironically, a ward not unlike the one he once controlled. And Hollow Pines? The foundation was shut down. A commission was launched into past psychiatric abuses. Florence's name, once a whisper of disgrace, was now engraved on a bronze plaque outside the rebuilt clinic, dedicated to patient dignity and transparency. Blaze and Mira stood there weeks later, just as the plaque was unveiled. She left the truth scattered like breadcrumbs, Mira said. And still, it took 3 decades and one stubborn widow. Blaze gave a small, rueful smile. That's the thing about buried things. They grow roots. And sometimes they bloom. They walked to the garden one last time. The grave had been refilled. But now it bore a stone. Simple. Plain. In memory of those who were silenced. Beneath it were the initials F.O. Florence Langdon. Mira turned. You ever wonder what made her finally speak? Even if it was from the grave. Blaze looked out across the mist-draped pines. She knew someone would listen. Eventually. Silence settled between them. Not heavy this time. Just complete. Mira reached into her coat and handed Blaze a sealed envelope. This came this morning. Postmarked to the station. No return address. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph, old, yellowing, torn at the corners. 3 women. Young. In nurses' uniforms. Florence, Evelyn, and a 3rd woman. Behind them, the old Hollow Pines Hospital. And on the back, scribbled in Florence's familiar hand. For when they finally come asking. Blaze held the photo a moment longer, then tucked it back into the envelope. Ready to go? Mira asked. He nodded. Let's get back. There's always another case. As they walked away, the fog rose once more, curling around the trees like old memories. But the garden was quiet now. No footsteps. No whispers. Just truth finally resting. And a secret that no longer needed to be kept.